The first time I saw my little sister beaten half to death, I was eating grapes out of my stepmom's hand like some spoiled prince. That image has never left me. I was 12, sitting in our living room in St. Louis, Missouri, when a crash echoed from the kitchen. A cup of water spilled. Then came the screaming. And then the thuds. By the time I looked up, my dad and 2 uncles had my 8-year-old sister pinned to the floor, striking her over and over. She hadn't cursed, hadn't screamed back, hadn't done anything but cry. All she'd done was spill water. And my stepmother, she didn't rush to help. She dropped to her knees, not beside my sister, but beside the puddle, wiping it clean and apologizing to the men. That was the moment my world cracked. Until then, I thought everything in my house was normal. In my family, girls weren't daughters, they were servants. It didn't matter if you were 5 or 50, if you were female, you existed to obey. Men gave orders. Women carried them out. No questions. No exceptions. And me? Since the day I was born, I was raised to be their master. I didn't see the chains until that night. The next morning, I did something that would change everything. I walked into the kitchen and told my dad I wanted to start training my sisters myself, in private. I said I needed practice giving orders without adults watching. He looked at me like I'd just handed him the world. He hugged me. He called me a natural leader. He bragged to my uncles that I was becoming the kind of man he always knew I'd be. He had no idea. Because the second I got my sisters alone in my room, I didn't order them to scrub my shoes or kneel at my feet. I told them to sit on my bed. To eat my lunch instead of serving it. At first, they froze, waiting for the blow that usually came if they disobeyed. My 10-year-old sister, Amira, even started unbuttoning her skirt without being told, because she thought that's what I wanted. When I stopped her, when I told her to sit instead, she looked at me like I had 3 heads. But when I slid the tray toward them and said, "It's yours," they nearly collapsed with relief. They ate like kids who hadn't been fed in days. And between bites, I told them the truth. "I'm not here to break you," I whispered. "I'm going to help you." Amira dropped her spoon. My youngest sister, Layla, lunged across the bed and wrapped her arms around me. They clung to me like if they let go, I'd disappear. That entire afternoon, we whispered plans of escape. Secret words, secret signals. I taught them how to hide money in places only they ever cleaned. I promised them that one day, they wouldn't live like this anymore. But outside my room, I still had to play my part. At dinner, I nodded approvingly when my sisters served me first. I struck them lightly across the arm in front of my dad just to prove I was disciplining them. Later, when no one was looking, I cleaned their wounds and begged them to forgive me. It was the most twisted double life imaginable, being their jailer in public, their protector in private. And for a while, it worked. My dad beamed with pride whenever relatives came over. "My boy doesn't even have to raise his voice," he'd boast. His sisters obey instantly. My stepmother would smile at her friends, telling them I had a gift for command. If only they knew. But keeping this secret broke me more every day. Watching Amira and Layla wake up at 4 in the morning to cook breakfast for my uncles. Hearing my dad's friends joke about which of my sisters they'd marry off first. Pretending to laugh when my stepmother bragged about how well-trained her girls were. And then one afternoon, in the attic, everything shifted again. I was digging through boxes looking for photo albums when I stumbled on a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was a stack of papers. On top, a medical degree. The name on it made my blood run cold. It was my biological mother's. The same mother my dad had always told me was crazy, uneducated, and had died right after Layla was born. He said she was nothing. That she'd never accomplished anything. But there it was. Proof she had been smart. Educated. A doctor. He'd lied about everything. I sat on the attic floor, holding that diploma, and for the first time in my life, I knew for certain, if I didn't get my sisters out, they were going to end up dead. That night, While everyone thought I was at religious classes, I went to an internet cafe downtown. I typed with shaking hands, how to report child abuse. How to escape forced marriage. Hotlines for kids. I wrote down numbers. I memorized addresses. And every scrap of knowledge I brought home, I fed to Amira and Layla like it was survival food. Because it was. I thought I was building a way out. I thought we were finally close. But then something happened that blew everything apart. And trust me, it made the spilled glass of water look like nothing. It all came crashing down over the stupidest thing imaginable. A piece of paper. One afternoon, my little sister Layla had scribbled her name over and over on a scrap sheet. Just Layla in shaky, uneven letters. She was 8 and proud she could finally write it. My dad found it. To me, it was innocent. To him, it was proof of corruption. Girls in our family weren't supposed to read or write. He stormed around the house like a man possessed, shouting that his daughters were tainted and too westernized. By nightfall, he had announced it, both Amira and Layla would be married off within the week. 10 and 8 years old. Brides. I wanted to scream, to tell him it was me who taught them. That it was my fault. But I swallowed it. If I cracked, everything would collapse. So instead, I played my role. Nodding, silent. Pretending to be the obedient son he thought I was. Inside, I was shaking so hard I thought my bones would snap. 3 days before the weddings, I told Layla to use the words I'd drilled into her. At school, she whispered them to her teacher, exactly as rehearsed, "I'm 8. They're forcing me to marry. Please help." It worked. The teacher called Child Protective Services. For the first time, I felt hope. But my dad was smarter than I gave him credit for. He'd given the school a fake address months earlier for safety reasons. So when CPS came, they knocked on a door across town. Not ours. By the time my dad heard about it, his fury was nuclear. He tore the house apart, searching for the traitor. And that's when he found my folder. The one with hidden notes, bruises I'd photographed, lists of hotline numbers, even the scraps of English phrases I'd taught my sisters. Everything. Gone in a bonfire that night. But instead of hitting me, instead of beating me bloody like he did the girls, he smiled. Because I was a boy. His son. His heir. He had a different punishment in mind. That night, he shook me awake. His breath smelled of whiskey. His hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Tomorrow," he said. "Amira's wedding. You're going to officiate it." My chest went cold. He laid it out with brutal simplicity. Either I stood in front of the family and delivered my 10-year-old sister into the hands of his 45-year-old friend, or Amira would be sent somewhere worse than hell. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. The next morning, the house was buzzing before dawn. Women draped Amira in red and gold, drowning her small body in fabric meant for a grown bride. Jewelry clinked as they wrapped it around her thin wrists. Her eyes were blank. Like she'd already left her body. The man who would be her husband sat in our living room, eating grapes from a silver bowl. My uncles lined the walls, phones out, ready to record the ceremony. To brag later about how devoted our family was to tradition. My dad shoved a ceremonial book into my hands. His palm pressed heavy on my shoulder, reminding me what would happen if I faltered. I opened to the marked page, my vision swimming. And then I noticed something. The groom, this man nearly 5 times Amira's age, was restless. Checking his watch, shifting in his seat. He didn't look confident. He looked uneasy. An idea sparked. I started reading the prayers, but deliberately butchered the words. Mispronounced them so badly they were almost nonsense. My father's grip on my shoulder tightened like a vice, but he couldn't correct me. To admit his son didn't know the ceremony would shame him. The groom's eyes narrowed. I went further. I turned to Amira and said loudly, "Show your future husband your hands." Her tiny hands trembled as she held them out. I tilted my head, pretended to examine them. "She's shaking," I announced. "Might be sick." The groom's face changed instantly. He'd already buried 2 wives before. He didn't want a third liability. He stood, grabbed Amira's wrist, checked her pulse. She played along, wobbling on her feet. "She looks pale," he muttered. I pounced. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday. Complained of stomach pain." That part was true. None of us had eaten much from stress. The groom dropped her wrist like it was burning. "I need a healthy wife, not damaged goods. Get her checked by a doctor." He snatched his coat and stormed out, ignoring my father's protests. The entire room deflated. Guests whispered. My uncles lowered their phones. My dad's face went purple. I thought maybe I'd won. But I was wrong. Because what my father did next was worse than anything I'd imagined. He dragged Amira into the kitchen, screaming that she'd learned to act sick. He shoved her head into a bucket of ice water, holding her under until her body convulsed. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Before yanking her up gasping, then slamming her down again. I shouted without thinking, "Stop! You'll leave bruises, the groom will know." Everything froze. My father blinked. And slowly, he let her collapse onto the tile. Then he turned to me. His eyes calculating, cold. "You're right," he said. "No more mistakes. You'll prepare her yourself. 1 week. If she isn't perfect, you'll both regret it." He shoved Amira into my arms like she was a project, not a person. And that's how, at 12 years old, I became my sister's jailer. What none of them knew, what not even Amira knew, was that I'd already started planning something far more dangerous than a fake sickness. But my father wasn't finished with me yet. And the next move he made almost destroyed me before I ever got the chance. For the next week, my room turned into a prison cell. Amira slept in my bed, wrapped in every blanket we owned because she still shook from the ice water punishment. I slept on the floor. My father ordered my stepmother to check on us every single hour, like clockwork, to make sure I was training her properly. She brought trays of food and told me I had to make Amira eat every bite. If she didn't gain weight, it would be my fault. I forced her to swallow scrambled eggs even when her hands trembled too much to hold the fork. I watched her gag down rice while tears ran silently down her face. Every hour, my stepmother's shadow filled the doorway, eyes scanning, face unreadable. At night, when the house was finally quiet, I whispered lessons in her ear. Phone numbers. Addresses. The words you had to say to trigger an investigation. I'm 10. They're forcing me to marry. Please help. She mouthed the words back to me in the dark. I held her hand while she practiced. It was the only time she didn't look dead inside. And then, on the 4th day, my stepmother did something I'll never forget. She closed the door behind her, set the food tray down, and slipped a small, cheap flip phone under my pillow. Use it wisely, she whispered. When you're done, hide it under the loose floorboard in the kitchen. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. She couldn't save us. But maybe I could. That night, I recorded everything. Amira's trembling voice describing the beatings. Photos of scars on her knees from being forced to kneel on rice. The bruise still fading on her cheek. Evidence. Proof. Something no one could deny. But while I was documenting, while I was planning, another thought gnawed at me. It was a memory. I was 6 years old the night my father gave me my first lesson in power. He took me to the garage and handed me a belt. My stepmother was on her knees, holding her hands out. Strike her, he said. I was a child. I thought it was a game. I swung weakly. He grabbed my hand and forced it harder. She whimpered. Do you feel that? He asked me. That's respect. That's control. I went to bed that night with the belt still sticky in my hands. I remember staring at my ceiling, wondering why my chest hurt even though my dad was proud of me. And now, 6 years later, I understood. That was the moment he'd broken me in. Turned me into a weapon he could use. That memory burned in my head as I lay awake, the flip phone under my pillow. If I didn't act soon, Amira would be destroyed the same way. But the walls were closing in faster than I could move. On the 5th day, my father announced he'd found a doctor, a friendly one who could be paid to declare Amira healthy enough for marriage. The exam would happen at our house. No witnesses. No questions. My stomach dropped. That meant there was less than 48 hours before the wedding was rescheduled. That night, I made a decision. I used the phone. I dialed a number I'd memorized from the internet cafe, a domestic violence hotline. The woman's voice on the other end was calm, steady. She listened while I poured everything out in frantic whispers. She told me to hang up and call 911 immediately. But I couldn't. My dad's friends were cops. His brothers were connected. If I called the local police, they'd just bring me home. The woman gave me another number instead. A special task force that handled forced marriage cases. Call them tomorrow morning, she told me. They can help. I thanked her. Hung up. Hid the phone. And then I lay awake until sunrise, heart hammering so loud I swore it would wake the house. Because the exam was scheduled for that afternoon. And if the doctor declared Amira fit, the wedding would be set for the very next day. I thought I'd already hit rock bottom. But I had no idea what was still coming. The doctor showed up at our house carrying a briefcase and a fake smile. He didn't even look at Amira like she was a child. He looked at her the way people check livestock. He pressed her wrists, peered at her teeth, listened half-heartedly to her heartbeat with a stethoscope that smelled like cigarettes. She sat frozen on the couch in her red dress while my father hovered proudly behind him. She's fine, the man declared after less than 10 minutes. Strong. Healthy. Marriageable. My father shoved a wad of cash into his hand, and just like that, my sister was sold. The wedding was set for the next day. That night, panic clawed at me until I couldn't breathe. I paced my room while Amira lay staring at the ceiling, her face pale and blank. I kept replaying the hotline woman's voice in my head, call the task force tomorrow. But tomorrow might already be too late. So I went to my father. And I lied. I told him I wanted the ceremony to be grand. Bigger than our living room. That we should host it at the community center so everyone could see how honorable our family was. For the first time in weeks, he smiled at me. He loved the idea of more witnesses. More people to praise his control. He agreed instantly. What he didn't know was that I'd already used the secret phone to call the number the hotline gave me. I'd told them where and when the wedding would take place. They promised they'd be there. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. The morning of the wedding, I helped Amira dress again. Red silk, heavy gold jewelry, veil pinned too tightly to her small head. I whispered to her while I fixed the fabric, hold on. Just a little longer. Help is coming. We arrived at the community center, and my stomach lurched. The place was packed. Neighbors, relatives, men in expensive suits congratulating my father, women smiling thinly from the back rows. The groom was already there, flipping through an envelope stuffed with money. I took my place at the front with the ceremonial book, Amira standing beside me like a doll on display. My father's hand pressed into my shoulder, heavy as a chain. The room hushed. I began the opening prayers, my voice steady even though my insides were shaking. Any second now, I thought. The doors would burst open. The authorities would come. But when the doors finally did swing wide, it wasn't the police. It was my oldest uncle. The one who had moved away years ago. He strolled in wearing traditional robes, grinning like he was walking into a party. I wouldn't miss my niece's wedding, he boomed. My father's face lit up with pride. And my heart sank. Because instead of rescue, I'd just gotten another monster in the room. I forced myself to keep reading. My voice cracked on the words about consent. My hand shook as I turned the page. Then I noticed it, a tiny stain spreading on the side of Amira's white underdress. Red. Blood. She must have scratched herself hard enough to bleed through the fabric. I seized it like a lifeline. Wait, I said loudly, pointing at the spot. She's bleeding. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The groom's face twisted in disgust. He stormed forward, yanking up her sleeve to see the raw scratches on her ribs. Some fresh, some older. She's unstable, he spat. Damaged goods. He dropped her arm like it was diseased. Snatched back his envelope of money. And walked out. The guests erupted in whispers. Some shook their heads. Some slipped out the doors, eager to distance themselves from the humiliation. I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd bought more time. But then my father's rage ignited like gasoline. He dragged Amira by the hair into the kitchen, shouting that she'd embarrassed him in front of the entire community. He filled a bucket with ice water again. And this time, he didn't just hold her down. He screamed that he'd fix her for good. I tried to intervene, but my uncle's hand clamped around my arm, holding me in place. Watch, he hissed. This is how you break them. My father shoved Amira's head under the water. 5 seconds. 6. 7. Her legs kicked wildly against the tile. I thrashed against my uncle's grip, my chest ripping open with terror. When my father finally yanked her up, she coughed, water spilling down her dress. Her eyes rolled back. And he smiled. She'll learn, he said calmly. I wanted to believe the hotline people would still come. That the cavalry was on its way. But standing there, dripping book still in my hands, my sister barely breathing at my feet, one truth sank in heavy and suffocating. If I didn't do something drastic, Amira wasn't going to survive the week. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room with Amira's soaked dress crumpled beside me, the flip phone clutched in my hand. My father's voice echoed in my skull, she'll learn. But I knew the truth. She wouldn't. She'd die. The hotline woman's number glowed on the tiny screen. I pressed call. My voice shook as I whispered everything, the ice water, the fake doctor, the wedding that almost happened. She didn't waste time. Stay calm, she said. We've got a team already preparing. They'll come tonight. But you need to keep her alive until then. Alive. Like she was already slipping away. When dawn broke, my father announced a new plan. Amira wasn't marriageable yet, so my uncle would take over her discipline. He pulled out a notebook and explained his system. Every mistake earned a mark. 10 marks meant punishment. Her first punishment came the next night. He forced her to kneel on raw rice for an hour. I watched her knees bleed through her dress while my father nodded approvingly. And I played along. I praised her obedience. Pretended to admire my uncle's methods. Pretended to be the son they wanted. Because if I showed even a flicker of resistance, we'd lose everything. But when the house finally went quiet, I bandaged Amira's knees and whispered, "Hold on. Just one more night." The next evening, the house filled with relatives again. My father was bragging to everyone about retraining his daughters. My uncle sat smugly by the door, his notebook open, tallying every twitch of Amira's hands. Then the doorbell rang. It was almost midnight. My father frowned, marched to the door, and peered through the peephole. His face drained of color. "Police," he hissed. The room erupted. My uncle lunged for Amira, dragging her toward the back door. I didn't think. I grabbed his notebook, the one filled with punishments and evidence, and sprinted to the front door, yanking it open. 2 officers stood there. Behind them, my English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, her eyes locked on mine. "They're taking her out the back," I screamed. Chaos exploded. Officers shoved past my father. My uncle cursed, trying to haul Amira through the kitchen. She screamed, a raw, jagged sound I'd never heard from her before. Neighbors spilled onto their porches as squad cars lit up the street, red and blue painting the night. When the police finally dragged my father and uncle out in handcuffs, my father turned to me. His face wasn't rage. It wasn't shock. It was betrayal. "My own son," he said, his voice flat. "You destroyed us." He didn't understand. He never would. My stepmother stood frozen in the hallway, tears running down her face. For the first time, she crossed the room and pulled me and Amira into her arms. "Your mother would be proud," she whispered. The next hours blurred, officers, social workers, blankets, questions. At some point I remembered the flash drive I'd hidden in my vent and begged them to let me get it. On it were photos, recordings, everything I'd gathered. Proof that it wasn't just my sisters, but years of abuse, forced marriages, and lies. We were taken to a safe house that night. A real home with lights left on in the hallway and windows that actually opened. A woman named Jamie handed us warm food and told us, simply, "You're safe now." Amira curled up in bed and passed out instantly, clutching my hand even in her sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of sirens still echoing in my ears. For the first time, the silence wasn't terrifying. But it wasn't peace, either. Because I knew this wasn't over. There would be trials. Testimonies. Years of scars to face. My father and uncle might rot in prison, but the things they'd done would never stop echoing inside us. When dawn seeped through the curtains, I sat up and looked at my sleeping sister. We weren't prisoners anymore. But freedom doesn't erase the past. It just gives you a chance to survive it. And survival, that was only the beginning.